I kept the skiff steady as waves slapped the hull, the fog rolling in thick as wool. This stretch of the Maine coast always felt old, older than the markers on my charts, older than the gulls that screamed overhead. I'd spent half my career tending dead lighthouses, retired glass towers whose only duty now was to crumble gracefully into the sea. St. Mary's Light had been one of them, dark for 30 years, gutted, lifeless, until tonight. Through the fog, a pulse flared once. A crisp cone of white carved through the mist, swept past my boat and burned across the black water. I froze, my oar hanging useless in midair. The beam rotated again, deliberate, rhythmic, exact timing from an automated system that was supposed to be dismantled. My radio hissed on its own, a crackle of static followed by a single distorted word that might have been my name. I felt the skiff drift toward the light like the tide itself wanted me there. That was when I realized the impossible truth. The tower wasn't just shining, it was calling. Most people think lighthouse maintenance is all salt air and heroic rescues. In truth, it's wrenches, mildew, and paperwork. The Coastal Preservation Office pays me by the mile to keep 73 miles of shoreline equipment in working order. Foghorns, signal buoys, decommissioned lights that still serve as visual landmarks for fishermen who haven't trusted GPS since the storms of '09. I travel alone in an aging pickup with a boat trailer hitched behind and a thermos that smells faintly of diesel no matter how many times I wash it. Every Monday, I leave my cabin in Boothbay Harbor before sunrise, check charts, log weather conditions, and report by radio to Bangor. They never respond in real time. Recordings go into some unseen archive. There are no coworkers, only the occasional harbor master waving me off. That solitude used to feel clean, the kind that sharpens your thoughts. Now it sits heavier. In 14 years, I've never had a light behave on its own. Generators only run if you drag yourself inside and flip breakers older than your father. Bulbs the size of helmets don't glow without current. So when St. Mary's Light threw that beam through a dead fog, logic folded like a paper chart under rain. That night, I filed a detailed report with coordinates, pulse interval, and atmospheric notes. By morning, the file window flashed Error 451, record withheld for internal review. That was the moment the ocean stopped being routine maintenance and became a question: what else out there refuses to stay dark? When I reached the department office in Rockland, the storm had already followed me inland. Rain ticked against the windows while I queued the database terminal, waiting for the modem's ancient chirp to clear. The St. Mary's file showed a tidy red tag: decommissioned 1984, structural hazard, access restricted. No generator listed, no auxiliary power feed. The last inspection entry was signed, oddly, in pencil. "System hasn't updated in years," said Bernie, pulling apart a packet of oyster crackers, as if this were routine. "Probably a sensor error. Light from Camden Head can bounce funny over fog." "It pulsed at a 19-second interval," I said. "That's the St. Mary's pattern. You can look it up." Bernie squinted into his coffee. "Could be the tide markers, could be anything. Nostalgia does that, makes you hear old frequencies." He tapped a gray folder onto the counter. "Leave the report, someone will log it." I left it, even though I knew someone was code for no one. Outside, gulls wheeled low above the harbor, shrieking in a way that sounded like alarm bells. My hands itched to steer east. Later, while checking a pressure gauge down the coast, the radio cracked again, briefer this time, just 2 syllables drawn through static. "Keep. Light." Then silence. I replayed it so many times that I could almost imagine the voice wrapped in those words. Older, rougher, soaked in sea brine. The office dismissed my follow-up email as atmospheric reflection, but the log data didn't lie. 19 seconds. Exact. If the record said the beacon was dark and my instruments showed it wasn't, the only way to prove the difference was with my own eyes. Next supply run, I decided, I'd divert course to St. Mary's Island. Rules be damned. Sometimes you need to see the truth before it's buried in another folder marked restricted. The fog returned 2 days later, crawling inland like gray breath. I loaded my skiff before sunrise, the hull stocked with kerosene, a toolkit, and enough coffee to survive a nor'easter. 10 nautical miles east of Monhegan, visibility collapsed into milk. The compass needle twitched as if the north itself were shivering. By the time the island took shape, waves were smearing against black rock ledges, and the air glittered faintly every time the unseen beam passed through. Each sweep lit a band across the fog, showing flecks of rain that never touched the water. I dropped anchor at the rotted dock and tied off fast. The posts were slick with salt and something like grease. The tower rose above the spruce line, a column of wet granite capped with glass darker than night. I'd kept the decommissioning photos, cracked lens, stripped copper wiring, everything meant to keep it silent forever. Yet here, a faint hum pulsed inside the stone, steady, mechanical. The iron door at the base was welded across the seam, but when I pressed my palm to it, the metal was impossibly warm. "Anyone here?" My voice bounced back from the cliffside, thin and swallowed. Seals splashed below, startled, though the tide had gone still. Flash. The beam cut through me. It came from above, slow, methodical, as if the tower had tracked my arrival and waited for me to look up. Through layers of fog and glass, something shifted against the lens, almost human in silhouette, a bent shadow trimming the flame that shouldn't exist. I should have backed away, called for backup, filed a formal entry request. Instead, I took out my pry bar and scraped the seam of the door until one weld screamed apart. The light flared, brighter than sunrise. Then the lock gave way with a sound like a sigh. Inside, the air smelled of warm dust and oil. Somewhere far above, gears I'd never fixed were turning in perfect rhythm. The instant I stepped inside, the temperature dropped from muggy to bone cold. My breath drifted like smoke in the beam slicing through a narrow window slit. The first floor should have been stripped, bare stone, a rusted fuel tank, an empty breaker box, but everything looked meticulously maintained. Brass fixtures gleamed. The kerosene pipe ticked with the slow pulse of pressure. A faint hum filled the air, too even to be wind. I climbed the spiral stairway, my boots ringing softly. The green paint on the rails looked new. Halfway up, the radio strapped to my belt clicked and bled static. A man's voice, close and broken by sea hiss, whispered my name again. Then 3 knocks echoed from above, perfectly timed with the speaking interval of the lantern rotation. Every landing told a lie. Bunks made tight, logbook open to yesterday's date, coffee mug rinsed but damp. Dust only existed where I hadn't stepped yet. Near the lens room, I found a toolkit identical to mine. Same model, same initials etched into the handle. The metal still held the warmth of a hand. When I reached the top, the noise became rhythm. The Fresnel lens rotated smoothly, gears meshing without a power source. Each revolution threw arcs of light through glass panels that shouldn't generate heat, yet I felt warmth against my face. Beside the mechanism, a radio unit older than me sputtered, coils glowing faintly. Then came the sound of pages turning. On the operator's desk lay an open ledger, its pages empty except for one thin, wet line of ink curling forward as if an unseen hand were still writing. The pen beside it scratched once more, invisible pressure tracing a new word. Hello. The ink shimmered, still fresh. The ledger wasn't the only thing on the desk. Beneath it lay a smaller black notebook, sealed in waxed cloth, the kind issued to lighthouse keepers a century ago for logging weather and supply counts. When I eased it open, salt-stiff pages crackled under my gloves, yet the ink looked glossy, brand new. The first entry was dated April 3rd, 1898. First gale of the season, Keeper Morrissey ill. The light must stay alive. Every entry ended with that same phrase, like a prayer or a warning. By May, Morrissey's writing turned frantic, references to storms that speak, to orders from the mirror within the flame. The final page stopped mid-sentence. Ink dragged across as if the pen had been snatched away. A wet blot still bled through the paper. Outside, the wind began to spiral, a low moan circling the tower. I snapped a few photos on my phone. The screen showed not the crisp black and white of aged handwriting, but color images. The same desk, the same pen, except a bearded man sat there writing. His head lifted slowly, eyes gray as fog, staring through the lens straight at me. The photo dissolved into white static. I dropped the phone. At first, I thought the boom outside was a wave hitting the rocks. Then it came again, thunder without lightning, a pulse that shook dust from the rafters and made the lens shiver on its track. I could smell ozone and salted iron. Somewhere below, the radio clicked, my own voice echoing from its grill, saying words I had yet to think. Keep the light alive. The journal's fresh ink shimmered again, spelling new letters beneath the old hand. It was writing me into its final entry. The lighthouse shuddered as if a massive wave had struck, yet when I looked out through the balcony slats, the sea was unnervingly flat. The horizon blinked, vanishing and reforming as sheets of fog folded over each other like muscle tissue. Air pressure crushed against my ears until every heartbeat seemed to echo inside my skull. Something was wrong with the light rhythm. It no longer followed the ordered sequence built into every lens I'd serviced. Instead of 18 seconds between rotations, it stammered in threes, like breathing. Each flash illuminated a different landscape, black cliffs where there should have been water, storm clouds twisting without rain. I grabbed the rail while the radio below erupted in layered voices, a chorus murmuring navigational calls I half remembered from old distress drills. The voices were out of sync, repeating the same coordinates over and over, overlapping until they blurred into a single phrase, "We never reached the shore." When I pulled the shutters closed, the temperature climbed. Condensation formed instantly on the brass fittings, then began sliding upward instead of down. Tools floated from the bench for a heartbeat before clattering back to the floor. The barometer needle spun freely, no longer resisting. Down the coast, other lighthouses winked out one by one. I counted 6 black horizons before the ocean swallowed them completely. No power grid failure could roll that cleanly, and I knew the feed wasn't regional. It was directional. Everything darkened in a perfect spiral leading here. The tower groaned like a living throat clearing itself. Then, finally, rain did begin to fall, only there was no sound, just perfect silence broken by the tick of the lens as it realigned itself toward the sea. The beam lengthened, steadied, and aimed inland. Whatever the storm was, it wanted to search. When the beam turned inland, it passed across the stairwell and stopped. I felt it before I saw it. Warmth crawling up my spine, the pulse of something alive. The frequency of the hum matched my heartbeat exactly. The light wasn't just scanning, it was listening. I moved toward the control console, meaning to cut power by instinct, but the switches were already set to off. The dials moved on their own, needles twitching like they were following breath instead of voltage. Every time the beam swept across me, I felt heavier. When it passed, I swayed, lighter again, as if some part of me had been pulled through my skin and returned stretched thin. The voices over the radio began to change. They no longer pleaded SOS. They laughed. Every laugh was my own, pitched lower, as if replayed through water. I backed away until the railing pressed against my hips, thin wind pressing upward. In the corner of the lens room, faint shapes condensed from the haze, a circle of them, standing just inside the glow. Their outlines quivered like candle air. Oilskin coats, keeper's caps, bare feet slick with brine. Each one had the same blank face, eyes reflecting the rotating flame, mouths moving in perfect union. Keep the light alive. I shouted that I didn't belong here, that I was maintenance, not devotion. The nearest figure blurred, stepped forward, and when the beam cut through him, I saw my own silhouette inside. Not a reflection, duplication. He smiled with my teeth. That's when realization struck like lightning without thunder. The tower didn't need fuel or current because it was a battery of people. Every keeper it ever had absorbed and stored, and now it wanted a new one. I jolted back, slamming the hatch shut between us, heart hammering in rhythms the light immediately matched, brighter every time I tried not to breathe. The tower was syncing with me, tuning itself to my pulse, like a lighthouse built for a single human frequency. It wanted me to stay. By nightfall, the fog thickened into something tactile, a slow-moving curtain that pressed against the glass like flesh. Every circuit in the tower pulsed steady and red. When I peered through the lens toward the shoreline, the beam caught motion below, lines of footprints glinting wet on the rocks, leading out of the sea. They came in silence, figures trudging through knee-deep surge, water sheeting off their coats as if they were emerging from another element altogether. Their oilskins hung heavy with barnacle growth, lanterns swung in their hands, throwing amber circles across the foam. Each face looked pale, eyes hollow and luminous as the lenses themselves. Even from the height of the catwalk, I could tell something about the way they moved. No coordination between steps, only that blind, exact rhythm of the light's rotation. The ground wind carried a tangle of voices rising through static, names I half recalled from the maintenance rolls. Men who died before I was born. And the last one, mine. The radio joined in, feeding their chant down the stairwell, the tower using its own metal skin as an amplifier. I slammed the shutter, but it made no difference. Each new flash painted them closer, first on the rocks, then at the base door, then halfway up the path carved into the cliff. The metal around me flexed with their footsteps, bolts squealing like whale song. The maintenance ladder rattled. Something began climbing. In that hiss between rotations, I heard the grinders of ancient gears being turned by wet hands. The air itself felt magnetic. Hair lifted from my arms, as though the tower had become a live wire drawing them upward. I wedged a crowbar through the hatch handle, but when I stepped back, the next beam illuminated a figure already inside, dripping onto the deck, holding a lantern that burned seawater instead of flame. It raised the light toward my face. "Keeper," it said, "your shift has begun." I lunged for the crowbar, but the figure didn't advance. It only turned, guiding its lantern toward the great glass eye above us. The beam within the Fresnel lens intensified, spinning faster until it became a single, unbroken halo of white. Every ripple of sea noise vanished. Only the pulse remained, once every heartbeat. The closer I stepped, the more the light revealed me. My own reflection multiplied across each prism, hundreds of versions of my face staring back with small differences. Some older, some scarred, some wearing the uniforms of keepers long buried. They mouthed in unison, not quite syncing with my breath. One raised a hand. I felt mine lift without command. The figure at the railing, my double from below, spoke softly. One light, one keeper. Its skin was the same color as the salt crust on the walls. Through the brightness, I saw more shapes spiraling upward inside the lens chamber, silhouettes of every man and woman who had ever watched this coast. Each one burned faintly, their outlines turning to liquid glass. I reached for the manual shutoff lever. When my palm touched the handle, current surged up my arm. Not electricity, but heat and memory. Sturm diaries, shipwreck prayers, the panic of drowning sailors. Every scream translated into light and poured through me. The lantern bearer smiled. "Now you understand," it whispered. The glow reached full bloom, bursting through the roof and up into the fog, a column stretching miles high. Outside, the ocean responded like an animal, a single low groan reverberating across the bay. In that glare, my reflections stepped forward through the glass and merged into the spinning light. The last thing I remember before blacking out was the lever moving itself downward, not to extinguish, but to lock the mechanism in place. The lens no longer turned on its gears. It was turning on me. When awareness returned, I was lying against the catwalk rails, skin prickling with phantom heat. The light kept turning, flawless as a clock. Every revolution tugged at my chest like a tide. Part of me wanted to let go, to dissolve into that rhythm and finally rest. But something stubborn, the mechanic in me, the part that believed every problem could be fixed with tools, refused. I crawled toward the base of the lens, wrench slick in my hand. Each breath rasped against lungs tasting of copper. My double watched from the opposite side of the chamber, its expression patient, almost proud. "It always ends this way," it said, voice overlapping mine like two radio frequencies aligning. "You keep the light alive." Not this time. I swung the wrench into the main coupler. The impact shrieked through metal, sparks cascaded down the staircase. Still, the beam held firm. I tore open the conduit box and yanked fuses that shouldn't exist, filaments of pure salt that smoked under my touch. The light faltered for a second, enough to make the copies waver, their outlines thinning like steam. Wind flooded through the gallery windows. The lighthouse seemed to inhale. I seized the last live wire, felt it burn through my glove, and dragged it toward the open sea-facing window. "Keep the light," the copies began. "Alive," I finished, and hurled the wire outward. White fire roared across the tower, then plunged everything into darkness. I didn't wait to see if it would reignite. I ran, down the spiral steps, past rooms that blinked out of existence the moment I passed them. At the final landing, I kicked the door open and dove into the pounding surf below. Cold swallowed me whole. When I surfaced, St. Mary's Light was black again. File 1442A. Incident at St. Mary's Light, filed by Coastal Preservation Office, Bangor Division. At 0630 hours, June 12th, local fishing vessel Marrow Bay reported an explosion or flare event at the site of decommissioned St. Mary's Lighthouse. Upon dispatch, rescue personnel recovered the subject's skiff adrift 1 mile south-southeast of the island. Engine off, hull unmarked. Inside, toolkit corroded, thermos empty, one burned two-way radio emitting intermittent static. No human remains were recovered. Structural inspection showed extensive soot staining near the lens chamber, yet generator wiring remained untouched. Fuse box unpowered. The official cause, spontaneous chemical combustion due to methane pockets trapped in seabird guano. File language repeated that precise phrase twice. Recommissioning not recommended. Environmental risk deemed minimal. All media inquiries redirected to Federal Maritime Safety Board. Coast Guard records amended to list St. Mary's Light as fully dismantled. Unofficially, 3 separate patrol logs noted visual anomalies on subsequent nights. A single flash recorded every 19 seconds for the duration of their observation. Weather clear, no vessels in the area. Each report ended with an identical notation in the margin, likely a copy error but left uncorrected in all duplicates. Keep the light alive. The line appeared in a handwriting sample later matched to the missing maintenance engineer. This morning, lobster crews out of Booth Bay swear they saw a new light burning north of Monaghan, too far from any charted tower. The pulse wasn't white, it was gold, warm as sunrise, and it blinked every 19 seconds. Radios crackled over breakfast, carrying a single fractured whisper that sounded like a man clearing sea salt from his throat. Some say it spoke my name. If you sail these waters and glimpse that beam cutting through the fog, don't look for its source. Don't answer if it calls. Just keep heading for the dark horizon and pray the light doesn't follow.